You are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Norman Richmond and Melinda Francis. And Lisa Watson is on the button. And I'm getting some feedback on this. I'm having heard myself twice. But,
okay.
We'll
how's that?
Oh, much better. And Dr. Gerald, we're getting ready to talk to Dr. Gerald Horne, who is he has a brand new book out called African Americans and a New Take on U.S. History. And Dr. Horne is the author of about almost nearly 50 books. And he will be at the Sankofa bookstore in Washington, D.C. on February 1st, which is the beginning of African Liberation Month or Black History Month, or African people. We have so many names for these for our events. And Dr. Horne, how are you doing today, sir?
It's all good. The book launch is February 1st, 6 days from today, 6 to 8 p.m. Sankofa Books across the street from Howard University in Washington, D.C.
Now, Haile Gorima, I think he's the owner, isn't he? Originally from Ethiopia, and also I think he's part of the crew that came out of UCLA's film school, along with Charles Burnett and the others. Am I correct in saying that?
You are correct, and Haile's working on a number of important projects, and I'll probably get an update while I'm at his shop.
All right, I guess, Melinda, you want to kick everything off?
Yeah, we didn't really get to Martin Luther King and commentary around the holiday and, his left-wing ties.
Well, sure, there's this Martin Luther King holiday. The scheduling gods played a trick on us by having it dovetail with the inauguration of the Tangerine Tyrant. It was perversely ironic indeed. Martin Luther King, as you know, is basically claimed by virtually everyone on the political spectrum, from left to right. I mean, the right wing, of course, harps unnecessarily and unduly on this random quote from Dr. King about judging people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Of course, they turned that on its head, ignoring the fact that he was speaking in the context of U.S. Jim Crow and apartheid. And of course, they, in a very malicious manner, try to wield those random words in order to destabilize diversity, equity, and inclusion and affirmative action, which was one of the first acts taken by the Tangerine Tyrant after he was inaugurated, seeking to give his 77 million strong base red meat, which would help to justify their casting a ballot for him. That simple fact, I'm afraid to say, has been ignored by many of our friends on the left, but that's another story for another day. As to Dr. King, recall that one of the reasons that he is claimed by so many is that he sought to have a relationship with Jack Odell, who, as you know, spent his last years in Canada, British Columbia in his case. Jack had been a leading member of both the National Maritime Union and the U.S. Communist Party. President Kennedy took Dr. King into the Rose Garden to escape the surveillance, potentially, of pugnacious FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover in order to tell Dr. King to get rid of Jack. Dr. King said he would, but he didn't, causing J. Edgar Hoover to call Dr. King the most notorious liar in the country. Then in February 1968, Dr. King spoke at a fundraiser for Freedom Ways magazine, where Jack was an editor. In full disclosure, I used to write for Freedom Ways magazine myself during its history. During his remarks, Dr. King praised W.E.B. Du Bois and said he should not be pilloried because he joined the U.S. Communist Party in 1961. In any case, a few weeks later, Dr. King was assassinated. And of course, the Tangerine Tyrant says he now wants all the documents from government agencies about that assassination and presumably about Dr. King himself disgorged. I hope that that's one campaign pledge and promise that Mr. Trump chooses to observe. With regard to Malcolm X, recall that it was in 1964, they encountered each other and talked about reviving the Robeson Initiative from a decade and a half earlier, charging the United States with genocide against Black people, dragging the United States into the dock, which led to severe sanctions on Robeson. Unfortunately, the assassination of Malcolm X deep sixed that promising initiative. But in any case, we, or many of us, get a paid holiday now. And we always should claim paid holidays for such noble purposes.
Could I let me say this in terms of the whole question of the international question? Am I correct in saying that like Marcus Garvey talked about taking the U.S. Or taking the colonial powers to the not world court, but to the League of Nations, I guess in the 20s. But as far back as I guess 1829, David Walker wrote an appeal calling for the freedom of Africans, not only in the United States but all over the world. Wouldn't you say that the African in America and Africans worldwide have there's been a segment of our people that have had a global outlook on our struggle?
Oh, sure, and it's waxed and waned, and I should also add the important footnote that it's a reflection of the adverse conditions we face in North America. And I'm afraid to say that with the advent of the Trump 2.0, as it's now been called, we're in the midst of a counter-revolutionary moment, not unknown in the history of the United States of America. And the danger is that I'm not sure if even people who consider themselves to be progressive are aware of the dangers. Now, I think that there's much more of awareness of the danger abroad. I know that Canada's in an uproar right now about Mr. Trump making random comments about using economic force to convert Canada to the 51st state with regard to wrecking the economy, concerning imposing punitive and punishing tariffs. And as I may have mentioned a week or so ago, it did not surprise me that 91-year-old Jean Chrétien, a former prime minister, almost instinctively, he said that Canada should be seeking to form alliances with others so threatened, including Denmark and Panama. He didn't include Cuba, of course. And so, yes, there are many Black Americans historically who have appealed to the international community. The problem today is that they're not enough.
I would like to, we wanted to talk about this new Raoul film on Ernest Cole and Raoul Peck. We've been a lot of talk about the Congo, and I think Raoul Peck was actually raised in the Congo. Am I correct in saying that?
He did spend some time in his youth there. I saw the film on Ernest Cole. What's astonishing about Raoul Peck, it reminds me of Steve McQueen, the Grenadian/British filmmaker who makes his residence in Amsterdam. Both McQueen and Peck are able to raise considerable amounts of money to do their projects. And the projects are progressive. And I think that we should not ignore that. I mean, I've been criticized by some ultra-leftists for praising Raoul Peck's film, Exterminate All the Brutes, which is a remarkable film, a castigation of settler colonialism. the ultra left criticized me because the film appeared on HBO, and that I guess makes it beyond the pale. I'm not even supposed to examine the content. I mean, you know, it's sort of nonsensical warped thinking. But the film on Ernest Cole is quite remarkable. Ernest Cole, of course, was born in South Africa. He was driven into exile like many Africans. He spent time in Jim Crow United States. He accumulated a unique and remarkable archive of photographs, many of which were annotated, such as this photograph was taken at this place in New York City on this date, for example, or this place in Johannesburg on this date, for example. Somehow mysteriously, and this is the mystery of this documentary by Raoul Peck, they wound up in a vault in Sweden somehow. Somehow, Raoul Peck is able to get these photographs, assemble a staff, turn it into a wonderful and remarkable documentary film. I must confess, when I went to see this film, I was a bit tired. And sometimes when I'm tired, when I go to a film, I confess I'll fall asleep. But this did not happen at this film. And in part, it's because of the editing, because every few seconds, there's a different image flashed on the screen of either Black humanity or inhumanity towards people of African descent. And so it's quite riveting. I recommend it, like I recommend the entire body of work of Raoul Peck, which includes the docudrama Lumumba and the aforementioned Exterminate All the Brutes, and also a sleeper, the young Karl Marx. Now, I guess the ultra left didn't know that he did that film, and that, as ever, he was able to accumulate this huge budget to get this film on screen, basically praising Karl Marx. I mean, it's mind-blowing.
You're listening to Diasporic. Oh, did I cut you off, sir?
No,
Sorry
sir.
about that. Oh,
I just have a comment. I just have a comment. It's interesting where he got the archives, because I believe that's where the Black Power mixtape. It was a Swedish archive as well, so it's interesting that all these archives are in Sweden.
Oh, that Swedish film. I remember that film that had Masai Hewitt and Bobby Seale were in Sweden. I remember seeing that film, right? But Gerald, before we run out of time, I want to kind of do something, chop up something, because I think it's important that we talk about, Mr. Trump. And I want to hear your thoughts on his plans for the Horn of Africa and his first week of shock and awe.
Well, as you know, Mr. Trump has referred to the entire continent as being comprised of so-called S-hole nations. I'll leave it to your imagination to ascertain what the S is that he was referring to. But in any case, don't expect him to ignore Africa. Already, there are plans in motion, if I'm not mistaken, for the Trump 2.0 regime to recognize Somaliland, which is the breakaway province from Somalia, in part because of geography. That is to say, it's across the Red Sea from Yemen. And as you know, Ansar Allah, during the bombardment of the Israelis of Gaza, were in a sense blockading the approaches to the Suez Canal, helping to shut down the Israeli port of Eilat. In other words, Ansar Allah imposed sanctions against Israel and curbed shipping through the Suez Canal, which was not helpful to the Egyptian economy. Speaking of which, the latest news is that Mr. Trump is pressuring Egypt and also Jordan to accept more Gazans. In other words, the plan is to make Gaza Palestinian free so that more settlers can claim that territory, or as Trump, the real estate developers, put it, this valuable beachfront territory, in a sense. So Mr. Trump has diabolical plans in store. And I haven't even mentioned the diabolical plan from Trump 1.0, when there was a lingering controversy, which continues to boil, between Egypt and Ethiopia about Ethiopia's construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam, which Egypt claims threatens its lifeblood. Speaking of the Nile River, Mr. Trump suggested that Egypt bombed the dam and bombed Ethiopia, believe it or not. And that's of a piece with this shock and awe of this past week. Stephen Miller, who was one of his top aides, prefigured this week that we've just endured when he suggested that Mr. Trump was going to be attacking on all fronts, entering the saloon with both guns blazing, to use the metaphor from the old cowboy movies. And that he did, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord, making the wildfires of Los Angeles this past few weeks more likely to be replicated elsewhere, withdrawing from the World Health Organization, which will compromise the United States' ability to confront another pandemic, further militarizing the border by sending the US military to the border, adjudging so-called drug cartels in Mexico to be terrorist organizations, which revives the harebrained scheme of Trump 1.0 of bombing Mexico, for example. I could go on in this vein, but perhaps the two most dangerous initiatives, one was releasing hundreds of miscreants, criminals involved in the attempted coup of January 6, 2021. They potentially could form the basis of a private militia for Mr. Trump. Already, these miscreants are threatening retaliation and retribution, for example, against their foes and Mr. Trump's foes. We've had very unpleasant confrontations with private militias. I need only refer you to the inglorious history of the Ku Klux Klan arising in Dixie post-1865 and still with us today. And then, in terms, once again, of red meat to the base, seeking to overthrow diversity, equity, and inclusion, which in many ways will be placing Black workers in particular in a disadvantageous position in terms of being hired for the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs with the federal government, not to mention others that are allocated by federal contractors. And of course, federal contractors also include, for example, the enterprises of Jeff Bezos and First Buddy Elon Musk. So this is an enormous blow. Already there are rumblings in Washington about a general strike on May 1st, 2025, because as I pointed out in my book on Washington, D.C. that came out a year or two ago, a long-term dream of the ultra-right is to chase Black people out of Washington, D.C., out of so-called Chocolate City. And how that happened will be the subject of my book to be published in the fall, entitled The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. And so many Black workers will be faced with the unappetizing choice of either following their job to Idaho or being unemployed. So Mr. Trump is advancing on all fronts. I'm not sure if some of our friends on the left were ideologically or organizationally prepared. I'm reasonably sure, I'm afraid to say, that the Black community organizationally is not prepared. And so all I have to say is buckle your seatbelts, but I'm sure I don't have to say that with regard to you folks in Canada, because I've been monitoring Canadian media, and CBC, Canadian Broadcasting, seems to be having a collective nervous breakdown.
Mm-hmm. You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. Melinda, you had another question?
Yeah, do we want to go to the Sahel state and the deepening crisis?
Well, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are really capturing the attention, I would say, from monitoring YouTube, of young Black YouTubers, particularly in the United States, who are enamored, understandably and justifiably, with events there. As you know, they have been reclaiming profits from these mining corporations. I think we talked about this last week, some of whom are headquartered in Canada. And
yes,
they just received an enormous shipment of military materiel from Russia. That is to say, Mali has just received that. President Mahama of Ghana, recently inaugurated, has embraced Ibrahim Traore of neighboring Burkina Faso. So there are very intriguing developments taking there that we should not ignore. And what we're going to have to watch out for is, of course, the attempted destabilization of these regimes. And I regret having to say this, but having studied the regime of Kwame Nkrumah, 1957 to 1966, founding father, we know that under the cover of the influx into Ghana of a substantial Black American expatriate community, under the cover and hiding within that expatriate community were a number of Black agents, for example. And I hope that history does not repeat itself. And I don't want to cast aspersions on that Black American expatriate community, who I'm sure most of whom have positive intentions. But on the other hand, we would be naive if we were to ignore a potential danger.
You're listening to Diasporic Music. I was at a meeting last night. There was a book launch of a young man by the name of Yves Engler, who's written dozens of books about. One of his books is Africa, in Canada and Africa. But he was, he has a new book out. But there was one of our friends on the left was in the audience, and he began to criticize the people in Burkina Faso because someone according to him, someone in the cabinet of Ibrahim Traore has ties with some mining company in Burkina Faso. I'll try to find the name of who he was talking about. But do you think that's enough for us to stop supporting Burkina Faso?
Well, no. I mean, first of all, some random comment at a book signing. I mean, we can't construct an entire thesis on that. In any event, perhaps you can elaborate on this. I get the idea that Canada is having a collective nervous breakdown in light of these threats from south of the border. Are you able to comment on that?
I think that this is just this is just concretely the people in my circles, and I follow social media, and I talk to a number of people, quite a few people, and I think people basically think Trump is basically out of his mind, Chrétien is basically is telling Trump to go, take a walk in the park. And even Justin Trudeau, who has been very not soft, but he seems to have been intimidated by Trump. He's kind of went out, said a few things, disparaging things about Donald John Trump. I think that the vast majority of not just the left in Canada, but Canadian people, period, even some of the right-wing commentators think that Trump is Donald John Trump is basically out of his mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, your leader in Ontario, Doug Ford, had a piece in the Wall Street Journal. It was a classic just the other day, where he suggested that the play should be for Canada and the United States to unite against China. That's the play. A classic diversion.
Well, I guess that kind of negates his criticism of Trump. Yeah, that kind of all the woofing he's doing. If he's going to hook up with the United States to go after China, I guess that shows you where he really is, right?
Well, I think so. I was a bit taken aback because he was selling so many wolf tickets with regard to Mr. Trump. And then he has this piece where he basically, it's a sellout piece, basically.
What is it, the Washington Post?
Wall Street Journal.
Oh, that's even worse, right?
Of course.
The Wall Street, that's the voice of what sector of the ruling class of Wall Street Journal? Who controls it? You know, it's different sectors of the ruling class. What represents? Who do they represent? The Wall Street Journal.
Well, it's part of the Rupert Murdoch empire. He's the Australian-born billionaire with interests in UK, where he just paid out a settlement to Prince Harry for invading his privacy. He has control of Fox News, which is the megaphone for the right-wing Trumpistas. He controls the New York Post, which is a sleazy tabloid, for example. And he also controls the Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal, I mean, I read it, I have to confess, on a daily basis. And I plan to have it delivered to my door when I move to British Columbia in a few weeks. So I follow it very carefully and very closely because it represents a hard right sentiment. Although from time to time, they'll diverge from unthinking solidarity with Mr. Trump. But that's hardly the norm.
I guess this might be the last question, sir, but can you talk about the Pan-African Film Festival, which begins in February, and will you be going to, I guess you will be going to, and are you on any panels? The Pan-African Film Festival is organized by a comrade of mine, of ours, Ayuko Babu. Will you be on any panels, or are you just going to view films this time?
Well, both. Actually, on Thursday, February 13th at 11:30 a.m. Pacific, I'm introducing the film by my friend and comrade Billy Woodbury. His film will be having its California debut, at least, Mario, about Mario de Andrade, who I mentioned a few days ago in an interview, was one of a remarkable core of Lusophone intellectuals, that is to say, intellectuals from former Portuguese colonies in Africa. Mario, and that's the name of the film, by the way, Mario, had roots in Angola, and of course, Amilcar Cabral, at the anniversary of his assassination, was marked just a day or two ago. His roots in West Africa, Cabo Verde and Guinea-Bissau. I mentioned that at a conference in Moscow some decades ago, I had the pleasure to meet Marcelino dos Santos, a founder of Frelimo, the continuing ruling party in Mozambique. Dos Santos, of course, was highly impressive. He basically left a deep impression upon me that resonates to this very day. And then striding beyond Lusophone Africa, of course, I would be remiss if I failed to acknowledge Govan Mbeki, father of second South African President Thabo Mbeki, whose writings are still worth perusing and studying. And so the Pan-African Film Festival will be replete with films about characters like Mario and other subjects. I've already circled to see a film entitled Afro-Mexpatriates. That is to say, Black Americans expatriated in Mexico, of which there is a growing number. And there will continue to be a growing number flowing south of the border and north of the border, as has been the case, I would argue, since the late 18th century, when the Slaveholders Republic was founded in North America, in the United States of America.
I believe that Lorraine Hansberry's father went to Mexico. I know that Marvin X went to Mexico. The poet who lived in Toronto. I also know that Ernie Allen, who used to be known as Ernie M. Kalimoto, he went to Mexico. He was part of the first formation of the Black Panther Party. And I know that Langston Hughes spent some time in Mexico. And I guess you talked about that on the show so many times about several of the leaders, the presidents of Mexico have been of African origin, African descent. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, and that reminds me that in terms of the interviews conducted weekly on KPFK, Freedom Now, 11 a.m. Pacific, kpfk.org, that two themes will leap out at you if you go back through the catalog, because most of the interviews are archived at the Activist News Network. One would be interviews about Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. Second would be interviews about Mexico.
Okay, and I wanted to say that Amilcar Cabral, I was invited to hear Amilcar Cabral speak, and I remember I was getting ready, and I got a call from down the street. I'm not going to say the city I was in, and they were basically saying, you know, they called my African name. They say the feds are down here, and they're looking for some. They use the N-word name, so and so, so and so. They call my African name, and I remember they put me in an automobile and got me out of Dodge. I never will forget that as long as I live. So I never got a chance to see Amilcar Cabral. There's a speech. I don't know. It's in his book when he spoke to the Africans in America in Harlem. Were you at that speech, Dr. Horne?
I don't think so. I think some more remarks, man. The Long Bay and people. I think all of them were there. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you would like to add, sir?
No, I hope to talk with you soon.
Next week we'll be raising funds, so we'll be ready to make our plea for some funds for this radio station. Thank you.
Right on. Good luck.
All right, Melinda, we'd like for you to close us out if you don't mind.
Yeah. Hope all our listeners stay safe during the week, and we'll see everybody in the whirlwind next week.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.